So I find most people will be responsive if it's geared about them. So when you show up at a meeting, I often joke and say salespeople have a tendency sometimes show up and throw up. Like you show up and I'm going to tell you everything about my company. And it becomes an immediate turn off to the client, to the potential prospect. This is where it becomes key in understanding the pain points of the client. And if you've done enough research, you can now interweave a story that's relative to them. That sticks really well. A potential buyer is going to A, appreciate the fact that you've done the research and it's accurate, and B, is going to relate to that story. Do you want to be a transactional person with this client, or do you want to be more of a consultative partner with this person?
But it's a little harder though to sell the candidate, and maybe it's because 'cause I'm working with some top hiring managers right now, but hiring managers are right now kind of a sticky point, and maybe they always have been. What storytelling can we use to sell candidates then to the hiring teams?
Well, then I would look at a candidate and say, I have a person who this is what they did for this company. They were 3 months behind schedule. They did the following. It mirrors their problem that they have today. That becomes the factor that can link you into getting that deal. I think it's a bad message to a candidate or to a prospect if your response takes 3 days to get back to them saying, "Oh, sorry, we've been tied up." And it's like, "Oh, well, I'm not a priority." I still believe a 24-hour response should make sense. There should be no reason not to do that. Recruiting forces might be stable, but they're handling greater workload, right? So therefore, it becomes harder. How do you follow up with 24? This is where AI can play a significant role. So, for example, I have a note taker. It does a great job in summarizing what the action items and what the next steps are. So, therefore, I would use that as my frame to be able to do an email back either to a candidate or either to a prospect. So it's been personalized, but I'm using AI as my foundation into what the action items and what the next steps are. Focus. What happens a lot of times, you get overwhelmed with all the information and all the data, and it's maintaining the focus of what's the purpose of the call? What are you trying to get out of the call? And almost developing a little bit of tunnel vision with that focus, because that'll keep you on the right track.
Hi there, I'm Denise Chaffin, and I'm your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I have with me Anna Frazzetto. And Anna is the founder of AFM Strategic Partners. Anna, welcome.
Yes, it's great to be here. Thank you so much, Denise.
And I do want to introduce also your book that I have purchased and read, and I absolutely love it. It's a small book. I mean, heck, you can carry this anywhere. Sales, Leadership, and Action. And it's in a great story how I met Anna because she had 2 granddaughters who were posting this book for her on LinkedIn, and so I reached out to her. So Anna, do me a favor, introduce yourself a little bit more, give us a little bit about your background, and we can jump in.
Sure, sure. So I have been in the industry for, I keep saying 25 plus years because honestly, it's probably way more than that, but I have to stop at 25 plus. But I come from a technical background. So I was a developer for years. And then I slowly started moving into the staffing industry and slowly started getting involved on the sales side of things. So I migrated from pure 100% technical to sales. And then I love the fact of carrying my own book of business. And then I evolved it into managing teams, managing operations, and kind of excelling my career, moving to the C suite eventually, which has been fantastic. And up until 2 years ago, I decided to start my own company and really focus on the sales side of things. And when I say sales, that includes sales and recruitment, obviously, as far as how do you approach the outside world, especially since the economy has changed so much and political climate has changed so much. So it's been very difficult. So it's kind of interesting to see how do you get back to basics, but yet evolve into what the new world looks like.
Anna, you've trained over 100 sales reps, and you have actually helped companies hit like 20% year over year revenue growth. But you say that most of the people in sales have made kind of the same mistake from the very first call.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a mistake 100% as it is. I think we have a challenge with how salespeople are onboarded, or even recruiters, right? How are they onboarded? And I don't blame companies. They approach sales. What typically happens? You have 2 weeks of online training or classroom training. Then you might shadow a person and then go hit the phones, right? Go start making contacts and start building your database. And that's left somewhat to the individual to figure out, how am I going to connect with this person? So I think that's a fundamental problem, is that coaching in the moment component that sales leaders and any kind of leader in a company needs to be able to do, is coach in the moment and trying to fine tune their approach on how do they build the right prospect list? How do they build the right candidate pool? How do they build the right client pool? And I think that's the fundamental error that I see over and over again.
Well, and you also mentioned too that sales is not pushing a product. And so when leaders are training their staff, whether it's recruitment or in sales, so why does that reframe change everything?
I think we bring it upon ourselves, right? So what happens is, especially during tough economic times, you wind up feeling the pressure that you have to hit the numbers. So then the leadership component becomes very focused on the metrics of, you got to get out there more, you got to push harder, you got to push our services harder. And in reality, that causes, I think, negative repercussion, because what's happening is you're losing the fundamentals of understanding who's sitting on the other side of you, either a candidate or a client, right? Because what's their real pain point and why would they buy from you? So I always talk about hitting the pause button, because you want to be able to pause, reflect on the situation, and be able to take a look at, how do I cause a paradigm shift where I really understand this candidate? I really understand this client. And therefore, then I could position what my company can do for them.
Yeah, that's actually a better position to kind of look at this from, right? I know in going back to talent acquisition, we're obviously in a role where we're selling kind of in parallel two different clients. We have our candidates, we're trying to sell them on a company that we're recruiting for. We have the hiring managers or the hiring teams, and we're trying to sell them on candidates. And I'm not really sure, honestly, which one's the harder sell. But how does solving a problem mindset actually work when we're playing both sides of the equation here?
Oh, I mean, it's a challenge. It definitely is a challenge. 100% agree. And I think if anything, it's only gotten harder, right, as time goes on. But this is where putting yourself in the shoes of the individual. And it's the ultimate game of matchmaking, right? Because what'll happen is, if you truly, you might see a candidate on paper or on LinkedIn and say, this is a perfect fit for this job, but they don't get it. Okay. And you have a client who's resisting a potential candidate that you think is a perfect fit, and they're not getting it. So this is where hitting the pause and saying, I need to understand what the challenge is. What's the resistance? So from a candidate perspective, is there something about this opportunity that's not appealing? Do you have concerns about this opportunity? Do you feel that this opportunity is in your sweet spot? It's again trying to dig under the covers to understand why the candidate has resistance. The other component that happens a lot of times with candidates is that they might be holding out because they want more money, right? And therefore they might compete one position against another position. Again, it's up to the TA person, the recruiter, to ultimately understand that and help them in figuring it out and hopefully guide them in the right direction. See, the challenge is it takes time, right? And time is not something that we readily have available. So it's how do you balance that? And the same thing with the client is that if they have an issue where it could be maybe a simple wording or a simple something that they saw on LinkedIn and that they don't like this candidate for that reason, then you need to break that mold, and that takes time to dig under the covers to find out. So how do you balance all of that? It becomes a matter of prioritizing, figuring out what your biggest hit is gonna be first, right? So you can't tackle everything at the same time. And then how do you utilize tools like AI that can help you in your argument point. So you still keep the human component, but it makes you do your job a little bit faster. So I know it's a lot that I've just said, but I think it's definitely a balancing act.
Well, and I think too, some of the things you're saying remind me of some of my interactions with hiring managers, right? And candidates, but especially hiring managers, because I think sometimes they're the harder sell for some of the reasons you're talking about, salaries especially. If you're working for a bigger company, the larger company is going to say, "Oh, well, we have these ranges that we have to stay in because this is what the rest of the team is earning." But the other piece of it though is, especially right now, you have hiring teams that are being challenged with education requirements, right? So some of them are saying, no, 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 these people have to have this particular degree or that particular degree. But other companies are saying, we're going to lighten up on that. And we're going to look more at the person's experience and what they bring to the table. Who are the clients that they've worked with? Who are the companies they've worked for? What are their skills, right? So those are a little bit easier now to fit into a conversation than they were maybe even 5 years ago, right? So those are kind of interesting dynamics. But hiring managers sometimes are the ones who are the tougher to turn. What are some of the common problems, right, that we see with the hiring teams and with companies right now? What are you hearing about in terms of trying to turn the tables?
Sure. So you hit on so many fantastic points, and I want to talk about, like hiring managers and paying market rates, right? And the big challenge. A lot of times, a hiring manager is somewhat in the middle of the organization, and their hands are somewhat tied, right? But I think the value that we can bring to them is being able to find out about what is their current turnover rate. Do they have a retention problem? If they have a retention problem, what are the reasons for the retention problem? And you start chipping away at fundamentally what the real issue can be. Also, it's the old expression, you get what you pay for. So if somebody is worth, let's say, $200 an hour and they only want to pay $120 an hour, you could say, I can find you a person at $120 an hour. But there's no guarantee that this person is going to work out for you because most likely they're going to jump ship as soon as they can get $200 an hour. So, price structure. The other piece is getting them educated and taking them out of feeling caught between in the middle of what their MSP or CEO or CFO are dictating that the rate should be, and arming them with market knowledge and information on what some of these positions cost. I find I can turn situations around as soon as I start talking about turnover and retention, because the cost to train a new person and the cost to hire another person is significant, not even counting fees that you pay an agency to get people, right? So not even internally how much it costs you. So that usually creates a little bit of a pause.
Okay, so this is an interesting story. So there was a company, probably, I think it happened right during at the beginning of COVID. They had contacted me and they were looking for registered nurses who are going to be working in skilled nursing facilities. And so we got into that conversation about their turnover, and their turnover was over 50%
Jeez.
because of salaries. And I said, "Well, yeah, obviously, you need to fix that problem first." I mean, and there were a couple of other pieces of it as well, location of the different facilities, things like that. But anyway, I never heard from them again. And I don't even know that the company is still in business, but they were, I mean, just a revolving door operation. And I think though, and it's funny, but and I'm going to say this out loud for our audience.
Right.
How many recruiters out there who are going to watch this video or who are going to watch our podcast? How many out there are afraid to ask that question because they're afraid of just the response or the reaction from either HR or their executive team when they talk about retention and turnover? Because sometimes that can be a very touchy subject. And so we have to kind of get I love the question though. It's a huge question and it's the elephant in the room many times, but I think a lot of us are afraid to ask that question.
I agree. And you know what though? But it goes back to, do you want to be a transactional person with this client, or do you want to be more of a consultative partner with this person? Would you rather, I have walked away from business. So for example, if I have a hiring manager that's saying, "Nope, we pay below market rate, it's a known fact, not going to change the whole structure internally." And I've walked away from business saying, it takes so much effort for the recruiting team to come up with key talent, and now to give them this restriction, it's just not gonna happen, so it's really not worth the cycles that you're gonna spend on this particular opportunity. But I would say it goes back to the fact of, um if you establish that relationship, it should not be that uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable when you feel like it's more of a transaction, like, "I need this, I'm gonna give you this," and there's no connection or bond.
Yep. So we need to stay strong and reframe our own thinking about who we are as talent acquisition professionals and practitioners. Like you
Exactly.
said, we have to become those strategic business partners and not be afraid to ask these hard questions because we're afraid of the response or the kickback we might get, right?
Right, right, right. And you know what? It's also important that every stage you have, I call it exit criteria. Basically, you figure out like, okay, this deal is not going to happen. So time to move on. And I think these questions will help you with that. I mean, clearly you want to win more business than say no to business, but I think you need to kind of find that perfect match.
Exactly. Now, what are some of the other common problems you think that candidates bring to the table or bring to the recruiters that are never acknowledged?
So I'm sure if you talk to any recruiter, they're going to tell you, you don't know the whole story when you first meet the candidate, right? Like, the candidate is not an open book as to what they're really looking for. And it could be because they might be anxious to get another job. And therefore, they'll say, "Yes, I'm willing to go into the city 5 days a week." And then they go through the whole interview process, and guess what? It's like, "Well, can I commute 2 to 3 days a week versus 5? Why does it have to be 5 days?" So, it's that kind of stuff that happens, I find, from candidates where they're not, "Have you positioned yourself or presented yourself anywhere else?" "Nope, haven't presented anywhere." Sure enough, guess what? This candidate has already been presented by ABC companies, so thank you very much. And the recruiter has gone through all these efforts. Now, again, I think it goes to the relationship. If a recruiter establishes a bond where the candidate starts feeling a level of loyalty to the recruiter, they're gonna be more upfront and direct from the beginning as to what they're looking for and what they need, and they will be honest about presenting themselves with other companies, for example. So, again, it goes back to that relationship component that might take a little bit of effort. Also, thankfully, with AI and other tools or whatever, you could do research on the candidate and find out, like, if there's any dirt worth picking up, that's out there on the internet.
So there is a lot of stuff on the internet. So we have to all of a sudden now become the storytellers for the companies that we're working for. There was a woman I interviewed a couple of years ago at a conference, and I loved what she told me about the company she was working for. She said, I went in and I researched all about this company and I found why did you even start this company? They were building boats or ships or something up in the New England area. And I don't remember exactly what was so special about this company, but she did. And she was able to sell this story that was absolutely incredible. And so I thought, wow, I love what she did. I told her, I said, that's really when, I mean, years ago, that's what we had to do in order to convince candidates because we didn't have the internet back then to sell different companies and what they did. So we had to be the storytellers a long time ago. I thought, okay, yeah, we need to get back to that more. We need to do more research on the companies that we are working for and also what started them. There was one company, a large, huge semiconductor firm that I was working for a few years ago, and my whole team was actually. And we found out that the CEO of the company had actually started out as a technician with that company and had worked his way up. And so, and it told a great story about the company and about their ability to elevate the careers of their employees. And so I love those kind of stories. And another medical device company that we've worked for off and on for years, just some of the products that they developed during COVID, for example, like a respirator that mimics the breathing patterns of the patients to save more lives, and just some software that they developed so that when they were setting up all these patients in these huge facilities outside of hospitals, the software was able to tell them which patients needed attention first. So again, another life saving measure. So being able to have these stories was huge. And you talk about that as a sales tool in your book. I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, you know why? Because first of all, I think we're dealing in a world where your buyer is the most educated that it is has ever been, right? So when you show up at a meeting, um, I often joke and say salespeople have a tendency sometimes early in their career show up and throw up, right? Like you show up and I'm going to tell you everything about my company, and it becomes an immediate turn off to the client, to the potential prospect. And so this is where it becomes key in understanding the pain points of the client. And if you've done enough research, you can now interweave a story that's relative to them. That sticks really well because a potential buyer is going to A, appreciate the fact that you've done the research and it's accurate, and B, is going to relate to that story as opposed to you just sitting there and saying, we have 10 widgets, we do this, we do this, we do this, right? So this is where storytelling can be a potential to win business both from the client side and from the candidate side. Because if you sell them on the culture and some cool things that this company is doing, and you know that where they come from a very regimented environment, this might be the deciding factor as to why they might want to make a change. So storytelling plays a significant role, I think, in establishing and that trusted advisor role that we were talking about, and also convincing both parties as to why to move forward.
So, but let's flip this for a minute though, because I think that it's easier to sell the candidate on the story. I mean, you said something just now that made me think of this. You talked about weaving some of the gaps, maybe, right, of what the company is looking for into the storytelling to kind of help sell the company to the candidate. But it's a little harder though to sell the candidate. And I'm going back to this again because hiring managers, and maybe it's because I'm working with some top hiring managers right now, but hiring managers are right now kind of a sticky point, maybe they always have been, but trying to sell them on a candidate. So how can we? What storytelling can we use to sell candidates then to the hiring teams?
So I would go back to as to what problem is the hiring manager trying to solve, right? So again, tie it to turnover, retention, and current problem that they're having. For example, there is a product that they need to launch, and they've been struggling on the QA testing front where bugs are going through the system and they don't know how, and they don't have the right QA leader to be able to kind of manage that. So that's a significant pain point. Well, then I would look at a candidate and say, I have a person who this is what they did for this company. They were 3 months behind schedule. They did the following, and it mirrors their problem that they have today. That often can play a role, especially if all the factors fit in correctly. The price is right, that they're willing to travel, they're willing to do everything else that it takes. that becomes the factor that can link you into getting that deal. So hiring managers can become, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but a little myopic because they're so focused on what they need. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That they want it. So it's getting to that point where you can kind of crack that code a little bit.
And I'm thinking of a guy that I spoke to the other day. He was really good, and he was talking about how he had started working for this company, and he was having a really hard time selling their product to the potential clients. And so what he did, he was trying to sell a product to doctors. And it turns out it was some sort of, I want to say it was a digital platform, and I can't remember exactly all what it did. But anyway, long story boring, he wound up switching gears, and instead of trying to sell it to the doctors, he was selling his product now. He went after the billing companies who then could attract the doctors. And he goes, I haven't had to pick up a phone since. Anyway, I thought it was such a great story. And so I, of course, documented it and I shared it with the client, and they loved it. And so I thought, well, I haven't done enough of that to your point. I haven't done enough of the storytelling for the candidate side.
And you actually said something too that I wanted to go back to about focus on education versus their personal experience. And what I've done to get around that, like if I've had a great candidate that does not have a bachelor degree because they're looking for a minimum of a bachelor degree of some kind, um, I would do a trial period. If I'm that convicted that this person is going to work out, I would say, let me put them on assignment for 2 weeks. And if you're not satisfied with the work that they produce in 2 weeks, then I'll just keep looking for somebody else. And it's a cost that I'm willing to take on. Now, of course, I do that only when I am 100% sure that this person is going to work out. And I have to say, 90% of the time, it works out where a hiring manager says, "You know what? This person's a rock star." Yeah. No, we can't live without him. Can't live without her. So that's the kind of thing, like little tricks that you can do to get them to the future. The future is gonna be upskilling and skill-based hiring, I think, versus traditional, yeah, versus education.
Well, the only thing is, though, on to your point, that they'd have to be available, though. If someone's still working,
Yes.
you don't want them to quit their job for 2 weeks.
Exactly. It's gotta be it's a niche play. It's gotta fit just perfectly.
Now, you mentioned in your book too about the first 30 seconds of a call and how that can decide everything. And most recruiters are, "Hey, this is so and so, and I'm with such and such a company." And yeah, I always started out my call so asking people, "Hey, do you have a minute?" Because that way, then that question always let me know whether or not they're going to be interested. Because some people would say, "Yeah, hold on, let me shut my door." Of course, now everyone's doing everything online initially, but even for people who are still cold calling, and I know there's some of us that are still out there, picking up that 50-pound phone and asking these questions makes a big difference. What do you think that first 30 seconds is all about? Tell us.
So, I find most people will be responsive if it's geared about them, right? So, as opposed to saying, "Hey, I got an opportunity I'd like to talk to you about," that's you going at them, as opposed to, "I found you on LinkedIn and I find your background rather fascinating. Wanted to ask you a question because we're in the process of working on an article that features this particular topic." Now they're becoming the center of the conversation. As you're talking to them, that extends the conversation. And you can now say, "Well, actually, I'm also working on an opportunity. Just curious. Are you in the market? Would you be interested?" And you could slowly change the course of the call. Now, with the writing of the article, nowadays, it's so easy to do a quick LinkedIn article. Like if the person is really more focused on the article, it doesn't take much to whip something together and get a few people together. But that's been a trick that I've used my lifetime and it works so incredibly well.
Oh, wow. I love that. Now, what about on the hiring manager side though? When you're talking to a hiring manager and or a company for the first time? and you've got that 30 seconds of capturing their attention to let them know you're the right recruiter for their position to fill their positions.
But a hiring manager, again, if you've done the research, do they speak? Right? The meaning, are they on a speaking circuit? Is there are they big? Do they have a big social media footprint that you can look up and pull on something that you can talk to? You If you make somebody feel valuable, that their knowledge is worth knowing about, they will open up to you. So before even talking about recruiting, I would want to try to get to know the person first and then evolve the conversation into, so how do you currently staff for your projects? Is there a possibility to continue the conversation further? But again, I start with that personal element first to try to get them hooked and then evolve into the business part.
I think it's so great because a lot of people too, like you said, are posting now. And
Yes.
I have done that. Well, even just for the podcast. Well, look how I got a hold of you, right?
Yes. Yes.
Your granddaughters, I mean, that was just the cutest thing ever that they were advertising your book for you. And so I thought, wow, that's awesome. So yeah, but that's what I brought to your attention when I contacted you.
Right.
So
And so
yeah.
and that was an immediate that is such a perfect example. That was an immediate response for me, like, "Oh my goodness, I need to speak to Denise and find out more." Do you know how many, when I say I get hundreds of LinkedIn messages, emails, and it's
God, we
all
all
about,
do.
right, it's all about their company. And they I don't wanna say they pretend, but they kinda do some initial research where it's like, "Oh, I've noticed your podcast, and I can increase the number of hits. If you're willing to talk more, our company has been established, blah, 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 blah," and then, like, 2 paragraphs about their company. And it's an immediate turnoff because it's like, "No, this is just cookie cutter boilerplate type of information you're sending my way." But you got to me, and the people that get to me, and I know my colleagues and my friends and everybody in the business, how you get to them is that personal connection where it becomes like, of course, yeah, of course we're going to talk.
Handling objections. The I'm not interested it's almost like an open-ended rejection, in my opinion, and this is my experience as a recruiter for many years. When someone says, "I'm not interested," I never just say, "Thank you," ever. I always go back with, "Hey, can we follow up in about 3 to 6 months? I realize you've only been with your company for a year, year and a half. I'm sure you wanna give it more time." They always respond. "Yeah, go ahead and check back with me," or "Let's LinkedIn."
I agree. And actually, what happens is it makes life easier for them because they feel like, I'm letting you off the hook now, so we can come to a polite end, and I could check off my box that I met with you and now kind of move on with my day. But I like what you do. It's not, "Oh, thank you very much," and you move on. You actually say, "Oh, okay, that's great, but would love to stay in touch." I think that's a great response. Also, I'm curious as to how you're going to be staffing your projects going forward. So if you don't mind, I'll ping you every couple of months and keep the dialogue going. Then they become part of my hit list of who I reach out to every 2 to 3 months and make sure that you stay top of mind. Now, when I reach out to them, I'm not just asking them about business. It might be an article I see that might be appealing to them, where they start valuing you as a key contact in the industry, as opposed to somebody who's just looking for more requirements. How many times have we been involved in conversations where they tell you, "Yeah, need to fill these 5 positions." And then you start working feverishly and you're teeing up candidates and things are kind of dragging. And then it's the missing link is, well, what would happen to them if they didn't fill these 5 positions? Does the project just stay on hold because it's not a priority project for them? Or has there been a shift in direction? So that's why establishing what the priorities are, I often would ask, what's going to be the impact if these positions are not filled? What's the sense of urgency in getting these positions filled? Because all of that is going to highlight to you how serious they are. Look, I mean, we're in, like I said, tough economic times, and I think companies will change on the dime as far as what direction they're going in. So that's why it's important to kind of establish that connection from the beginning and figure out, does this still remain to be a priority? So we're not spinning the cycles of recruiters or sales for that matter in regards of going after something that's low odds of winning.
Companies are not gonna quit hiring even during tough economic times, but they will change how they hire,
Yes.
right? Not only that, but I've actually asked companies before in hiring teams, "Why is this a priority?"
Yeah, that's a perfect way to get to the root cause, if it is a priority or not. And if they can't answer it, well, that's a little bit of a telltale sign as to why they can't answer.
Follow-up is something I think that we've all become too busy to really, and I know that we have the CRMs now, we have AI to help us. What do you think are some of the best follow-up practices that we can develop as talent acquisition practitioners, especially now that we are moving into a more consultative role with our teams and just in the industry in general?
Right. I still believe a 24-hour response is should make sense. There should be no reason not to do that. But now as volumes, so what's happening? Recruiting forces might be stable, but they're handling greater workload, right? So therefore it becomes harder. How do you follow up with 24? This is where AI can play a significant role. So for example, I have a note taker, I use Otter AI, but there are so many out there. It does a great job in summarizing what the action items and what the next steps are. So therefore, I would use that as my frame to be able to do an email back either to a candidate or either to a prospect. And so they see that. So it's been personalized, but I'm using AI as my foundation into what the action items and what the next steps are. And it keeps that level of communication open. So that would be my suggestion. The follow up is necessary. I think it's a bad message to a candidate or to a prospect if your response takes 3 days to get back to them saying, "Oh, sorry, we've been tied up." And it's like, "Oh, well, I'm not a priority in this company. So I'm going to look at other avenues as to who to look at." That candidate is going to be talking to multiple recruiters because it's like this recruiter just doesn't have enough time for me, kind of thing. So that's why the 24 hours is a big signal.
So now when you're using your note taker, I'm using one as well. I do like the note takers. How are you using though that note taker to actually set up your 24-hour callbacks?
So I have not done that. What I do is in real time, like when I have the meeting, I call out the action and the next steps, and then I use that as my email foundation to send it back. So I have not done that yet as far as a follow-up because again, I feel like the human element is important and I'm not sure AI can manage it 100% and not look like AI. Because that's the other thing is that I'm always sensitive to as a buyer or as a candidate. You don't want to look like, well, I'm getting screened by AI. I'm getting my notes from AI. I'm getting my follow up from it. Like, does the company exist? So you need to have that personal component.
I know. In fact, LinkedIn now has a really great AI tool, and I'll give them credit for it. When you send a candidate an in mail now, they will include in the in mail a couple of things. One, they will make reference to where the person works and what they do and how that fits into the role that you are advertising. But I still have to go in and make it look like it's me. I never send off just an AI generated in mail ever. I
That
always go in and doctor it up a little bit to make it look like it's me. I'll put the person's name in there a couple times so that it does look more personal. What I do like too is they also have the sequencing thing now where you can set up sequencing emails in case a person hasn't responded. So,
Oh, absolutely. So there's a tool out there, Apollo, if you're familiar with Apollo, but they do a great job as far as being able to kind of follow up and if you um pre-write like all what you want your touch points to be. It will do a great job at reaching out to each of the potential candidates or each of the clients. So you have the customization that you personally wrote everything yourself, might have used AI to help you a little bit, but then you can have Apollo kind of do it for you automatically. So there's different tools out there, and I always say now is a great time to do that technical assessment internally. Do you have the right tools, and how can you operate more effectively and efficiently?
So let's talk about closing. I think that's one of the stickier points of recruiting, especially for people who have been very transactional in their roles as talent acquisition professionals. Maybe they haven't had to do a lot of closing. Maybe the hiring managers have kind of done it for them up front and they just have to cross their T's and dot their I's, so to speak. But I think as we transition more into consultative and business partner roles with our clients, I think we're going to wind up being closers again, more so than we have been in the past. I think it's going to be a bigger part of our job now.
Again, it's going back to the basics of establishing those relationships with your clients, with your candidates, and therefore you want the recruiter to kind of play that role and be able to close. It also will make the recruiter more comfortable in closing if they are more actively involved at that level with the client and with the salesperson, right? So because if you think about it, it's a little bit of a tripod that you have the potential client, you have the salesperson, and you have the recruiter. So you want to make sure that the recruiter is very comfortable in representing that going forward. So I agree. I do think that we're going to get back to that, where recruiters are going to play a significant role in actually closing, and sales can help them. Again, this is where the partnership comes up internally, can help them move that over the finish line.
Based on everything we've discussed, right? Do you feel this is the right fit? That's a question that we're always asking candidates before we like close them, right? So that's one of the questions I think all of us have asked. And sometimes they surprise us and they'll say, "Well, no, actually," and then they'll give you a laundry list and you think, "How come we didn't know about this up front?"
I do a couple of different things, which is kind of funny. I am assumptive based on our conversation. This position hits all of these marks, and then ask like the final question of like, I'm going to present you this Tuesday, and or this is the offer, and then we are good to go. We can establish your start date. So I be a little assumptive, and I do that on purpose because if they do bring up questions, then I can start saying, okay, well, you can start questioning, well, why is this coming up now? We're at the nth hour of the opportunity. So help me understand, why has this now taken on more of an issue or more of a challenge? How can we get around it? And then I try to like break it into nuggets. So I'm focusing in on just the specifics as to what's bothering them. And the commute might be one of them. And I have often gone back to the client saying, I know the position is 5 days a week, but if the person has been on board for 6 months, are you open to them working from home 2 days a week? If they're a producer, you're gonna know in the first 6 months, are you open to, and maybe we start with 1 day a week and then move it to 2 days a week. And usually you can come up with some kind of compromise that'll make everybody happy, because hopefully the hiring manager is super excited about getting the person, and the candidate still wants the job but is feeling the weight of the world because of the commute. So that's how I approach it a little bit. I'm a little assumptive upfront with the candidate.
Vacation policies. So right now he's been with this company for I think 8 years, I think is what he was at, and he has 4 weeks paid vacation, and come January of next year he'll have 5 weeks paid vacation. Well, the company that I was recruiting him for starts him out at 2 weeks. So companies used to do some bridging of vacation time, and that seems to be an issue, bigger issue at times, depending on the position that you're looking for and the requirements that the hiring team gives you for the position itself. They may even say, "We're looking for somebody with 8 years experience." Well, one of my first questions now is, Are you going to bring somebody out with 8 years experience out of their company when they're making when they have 4 weeks of paid vacation? Are you gonna give them 4 weeks paid vacation if you want that 8 years of experience? So it's a much bigger hurdle than some of the other hurdles. So what's your experience around that one?
Yeah, I mean, that is a common problem, and I usually try to position that upfront immediately with the candidate. And I also have that conversation with the hiring manager upfront. Now, there could be a compromise. There could be that they get the 2 weeks and the other 3 weeks are only 50% paid, but they could take it throughout the year. Or 1 week is 50% paid, the other two is non paid, but they need to have the time off because they want to spend time with the family. I try to come up with an alternative, but I try to nip it immediately because that is a common one. Again, it's all part of the negotiation and figuring out how do we make this fit. And if it doesn't fit, then we just have to learn how to walk away.
Creating a list too and having that list of potential objections when you are working with a company for the first time and going through it just like you're asking about the gaps, you're asking about what their priorities are. So okay, so let's say we get the right candidate in here. What are going to be some of the challenges that we might face? So how are we going to overcome those if this comes up? So I like that. And I love the one habit you say changes everything. Plan tomorrow tonight.
Yes, the reason why I say this, I'm a fan of this, is because it's a way of organizing your thoughts for the upcoming day. So I am a big fan. If you were to look at my desk, I have a pad that has my action to-do list. I have a giant calendar that has activities planned for the month. I have, of course, my online systems as far as meetings. And what happens is on Sunday, I used to love to prepare, okay, what is my week going to look like? And what is my Monday going to look like? Now, of course, that can change based on fires that happen throughout the course of the day, but it puts you in the driver's seat. You're in control of what happens. You're more proactive versus reacting to the situation around you.
I love that idea, and I have to be honest, I don't know, I think I've done it when I look at my calendar for the next day and I see I have a really busy calendar, I'll try to plan ahead more, but I have not been good about doing that, so I so appreciated reading that and hearing you talk about it because it's something I need to put into practice for myself, so thank you. Moving into a little bit different direction here, because this is a question I'm going to start asking, I think, a lot of my guests, because just of where we're at right now in the recruiting industry. You've worked with clients in many different industries, oil and gas, pharma, financial, software, medical device, all simultaneously. And I have as well, because that's the world I grew up in. Pivoting from one industry to the other, depending on who is moving, right? These are wildly different worlds that we get thrown into. And I'll tell you what though, it keeps our brains sharp. Experience have you gained from repositioning talent like this when the market moves around?
Oh, I love when the market moves around because I think it keeps you sharp and being able to kind of position the right talent. The key starts with the fundamentals, like understand your industries, right? So when I went into oil and gas, I knew nothing about oil and gas. So I spent the first couple of months or whatever really doing a deep dive and understanding how that industry operates versus your pharmaceutical or your financial services or your Department of Defense or what medical devices or software. So it's doing that initial research that I think helps me. And then it's coming up with the stories, right? So tying it to what we were talking about at the start of this, as you're going after your prospect list and who to go after, what stories are relevant within that industry space that can cause that connection that you're trying to establish with the candidate or with a hiring manager. And sometimes I've actually used the lack of knowledge as a way of getting in front of someone because you worked at a company for so many years. Like I worked at Air Swift, that was the oil and gas, that was a majority of their staffing business. And we had the mega companies and use it as I'm new in the industry. I would love to spend a little bit of time with you to learn a little bit more about how you go about hiring. How is this different? I come from a tech background, and that would work really well in being able to establish that.
I think it's really important, especially now. I think more people are going to have to make those leaps from one industry or start working with multiple industries. We've done it in the staffing on the staffing side for a long time, but I think more corporate minded recruiters and talent acquisition professionals who've worked on the corporate side, also need to, and if they're working for one particular industry, they need to be working in different parts of that industry and covering different parts of that industry so they can so it will help them to shift then to a different industry if they need to. That's just my 2 cents on that one.
Exactly.
What does it mean to make yourself indispensable beyond recruiting? Let's wrap up with that one because I mean I love that question.
That's a hard question in the sense that it's not like a cookie cutter response, but I go back to becoming that trusted advisor to a hiring manager, to a client, to a candidate, where they have so much trust in you, and that becomes that you're indispensable. So instead of me having a recruiter that's 10,000 miles away from me that's trying to find a candidate, or I'm using an automated recruiting system out there, you're missing that human element that you get from establishing that relationship. That's what makes recruiters and salespeople indispensable. It's how they do a successful job in marrying tools, technology to help them do their jobs better. But at the end of the day, they have that human connection with the client and with the prospect.
Correct. Love that. Anna, if someone's listening to this podcast recording on a Tuesday morning and they are about to get on a call with a candidate they're nervous about, what is one thing you want them to remember from everything that we've talked about today?
So I would probably put it in one word: focus. Right? Because what happens, right? What happens a lot of times, you get overwhelmed with all the information and all the data, and it's maintaining the focus of what's the purpose of the call? What are you trying to get out of the call? And almost developing a little bit of tunnel vision with that focus, because that'll keep you on the right track in being able to establish that connection and everything that we've talked about so far.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Again, Anna's book is called Sales Leadership in Action. You can find her on LinkedIn. She's got a great LinkedIn page.
LinkedIn is a great way, or you can use my personal email, which is Anna at afmstrategicpartners.com. Denise, thank you so much. This has been a thrill and a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Anna.